Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Political Paradigms. Was a bit sick last week, and then the other two didn't bother to do the episode. So we're here. It's Toby and Theo.
Hello. Correction. We didn't forget to do it. We did it, but we lost the file.
No, you are kidding me.
Fact.
That's awful. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was it good? Was it any good?
Oh, incorrect. Ask Sonny. It was great. Unfortunately,
great.
Sonny's jetting off someplace unknown at the moment, but he will also tell you it was probably one of the best on record, which is why it was such a shame that it got mysteriously lost.
So all about British electoral politics on this podcast, and we want to talk about sort of the big story from the last 2 weeks. It's all anyone's talking about. The Rochdale by-election. A landslide win for George Galloway over the Labour Party, sort of running to the Labour Party's left, but on issues like the war in Gaza, very explicitly, running to their left economically, but also running as sort of a general populist. This is what George Galloway said after winning the seat.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip.
Now, goes without saying, George Galloway is a very controversial political figure. What also goes without saying, though, is that this is a genuine democratic election. Unique circumstances. The Labour candidate was basically disowned, so they did terribly. You can't read too much into that. An independent candidate, David Tully, did pretty well, sort of campaigning on, sort of focusing on the local area. George Galloway only got 40% of the vote, but it was big turnout, won by nearly 20 points. By big turnout, I mean big for a by-election, not actually big turnout. Theo, is this a seismic moment in this parliament? Will we look back on this in sort of 5 years, 10 years?
It's certainly significant, Galloway making a return, but we have to keep in mind he is, quite a prodigious, controversial, you have to bleep me out, shit stirrer. So
it's been said.
It's not, there's only one George Galloway, right? We're not going to see suddenly all over the country some kind of stochastic influx of independent, pro-Palestine, vocal opponents of Israel flipping Labour seats. It's not going to happen, but it is a sign that there is really strong sentiment about this, regardless.
This is what I was going to say, right? Like, there is only one George Galloway. It's a bit like the sort of Reform UK thing. The idea that Nigel Farage could win like a safe Tory seat, he probably could, but other Reform candidates probably can't. I think it's the same thing with Galloway, right? Like, he can go into a Labour seat, cause carnage. Can, like, random Joe standing for the George Galloway party? Probably not. Not in the same way.
No, certainly not. George Galloway is unique in his dexterity and always somehow returning to Parliament, even though it always ends in disaster for him.
This is it. And he will be a thorn in the side. And I think there is something worth saying here, which is there is a view that George Galloway represents, which is a different view on the conflict in Gaza and on a two-state solution than sort of the political consensus. George Galloway's view, as he explains it, is he supports a one-state secular solution. So he doesn't he's not a Zionist, and he basically believes in a multi-faith sort of democracy in what is now Israel, which is completely different and has received a vote. Do you think it's significant that that is supported in the country, but there is no real political support for it? Or do you think we read too much into the result by saying something like that?
I might err on the side of reading too much into the result. Broadly speaking, as you heard in his speech, this is for Gaza. He represents the view that is not simply aligned with Zionism as a default, as we've seen in the Labour Party. I have been saying it for the past few months that Keir Starmer's impudence, perhaps, on the issue of the Israel Gaza war isn't going to take too much of a bite out of his popularity. But now that kind of snowballed, and in fact, it seems like it could make a mark. But in terms of a specific policy on the issue being more popular than others, I think it's more just allegiance and solidarity with Gaza than anything else.
Yeah, and it again, interestingly, it seems to be sort of, you know, you get the stereotypes about different groups of voters. It seems to be cross-cultural in that seat. You had obviously a lot of Muslim voters voting for George Galloway. You also had a lot of white voters voting for George Galloway in order to get that vote share. And he appeared to assemble a kind of interesting, angry mishmash of an electoral coalition of sort of dissatisfied voters, sort of around a variety of factors. And then, so Rishi Sunak comes out, and I thought this was very interesting. And I think historically in Britain, even if you view George Galloway as beyond the pale, and plenty of people do, and plenty of people don't, but if you do, it never quite sits well with me when people sort of try and preemptively condemn an electorate for what they've done, rather than going, look, there are clearly issues of concern, most people are well-meaning, and, you know, as the Labour Party, as the Conservative Party, we will reach out to voters in Rochdale and sort of see what we can do for them. Whereas Rishi Sunak sort of comes out, gets the podium out. I'll read some of the stuff he said. Threats of violence and intimidation are alien to our way of doing things. They must be resisted at all times. There are forces at home trying to tear us apart. George Galloway's victory is beyond alarming. Again, this is about a by-election from the Downing Street podium. Nearly everyone in Britain supports these basic values, but there are small and vocal hostile groups who do not. Islamist extremists and the far right feed off and embolden each other. They are equally desperate to pretend their violence is justified when actually these groups are two sides of the same extremist coin. And he's promising a sort of further crackdown on protests, but also saying sort of we support the idea of protest. We think sort of, you know, it's the sort of speaking out of two sides of his face kind of thing. What did you make of that, Theo? Was that a statesman-like address, or did it feel... How did it sit with you? I mean, I saw some people in the Times saying there's an element of... Obviously, there are real concerns in this country about community cohesion and extremism, but there was a feel of like he's almost trying to put Labour in a difficult position, which again, doesn't sit well with me when we're dealing with very serious issues.
Yes. I mean, I suppose there is a wider threat that we've seen in the country to MPs recently, with their safety coming more into question.
Yeah.
But again, he's attempting to frame an entire side of a very heated, very ongoing, you know, issue in that way. And yeah, that perhaps could be attempting to stick Keir Starmer right in the middle, force him to either go, you're for or against us, you know, some kind of power play. I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Yeah, so that's been going on. There've also been some concerns in the Conservative Party this week about Islamophobia, the whole Lee Anderson thing, Lee Anderson being kicked out of the party for remarks, Liz Truss going over, hanging out with Steve Bannon, arm in arm. We do often talk about sort of I think it was it Sonny who always says the sort of UKIPification or the Britain First-ification of the Conservative Party. And sometimes I think the rhetoric is overblown, but it did feel a bit like that this last couple of weeks, didn't it? Some of the stuff we were seeing. I wasn't surprised, but it does feel like the drift is more explicit to the further right.
Certainly from Liz Truss's remarks, it felt like that. I mean, I think perhaps she was playing to an American audience.
It felt that way.
Talking about the deep state Financial Times conspiracy that brought down her government, it was quite funny, really.
Yeah. And I think, do you know what? At the end of the day, all these are really important issues. I mean, you know, the issues, stuff around Gaza, are arguably sort of the biggest moral issues right now, or some of the biggest moral issues in the world right now. However, in terms of British electoral politics, there are issues for Labour with this and their core vote. There are issues for the Conservatives with Islamophobia. There are issues across politics in terms of extremism and safety of MPs. Let's be real. none of this makes a bloody jot of difference to the general election, does it, Theo?
I wouldn't say so. You could even say that it balances out the issues both parties are facing with investigations and disgraced MPs and prejudice allegations. And again, the forces, the macro level paradigms that are to determine this election are much bigger than, again, the day-to-day. Though it has been heating up more than expected recently, I will say.
Yeah, no one is. No one has a clear week. Everyone's in meltdown, and it did feel a little bit crisis of legitimacy last week when that by-election result came through, and then all the parties were like, "This is awful," but they didn't really have anything to say to those voters, and I felt like that's kind of it gave me it felt a bit Brexit. Do you know what I mean? After Brexit, and they all don't know what to say, and it's just politicians need to learn to sort of connect with their actual voters.
Well, I suppose in a constituency that ended up in that kind of state, it probably just wasn't worth them going to speak any words to those voters.
Yeah, those voters are like, nah.
They've been lost.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, it was George Galloway or David Tully that were going to win that seat. It wasn't going to be. It wasn't going to be. Spare a thought for the Lib Dems, who thought they might have had a chance because they were the least tainted. 7%.
Who?
the Lib Dems.
Never heard of them.
They did worse than the Labour candidate, the disgraced Labour candidate. Incredible Lib Dems. Brightening up the darkest of weeks. All right, on to the budget. There's a few headlines. Has anything stuck out to you? I mean, the budget is coming. We keep saying, we said this about the party conferences. Oh, it's the last conferences before the election. Probably wasn't. We're probably going to have to sit through them again this year. Same thing with this, really. Oh, it's the last budget. No, they're saying they're going to do an autumn statement before the election. But more tax cuts. Anything standing out to you in advance of this, Theo? Is this the big moment, or is it more bluster?
More bluster. I'm gonna have to say. I wish I could bear more exciting predictions, but unfortunately not.
We're looking at they're looking at maybe pinching Labour's idea on non-dom status, using that to raise money for tax cuts. Now, the reason that's significant, as well as it being a U-turn, voters often don't care about U-turns, it's fine. The significant thing about that, in my view, is Labour have a few policies where they always go back to, it's the non-dom thing, that's how we'll get the money. So if the Tories take that away, do Labour just have to scrap what remains of their policies?
I suppose. Then again,
is that the end of the road? No more Labour policies.
Policies to win. They don't really need policies to win.
Well,
that's the truth of the matter.
It's true. But are we now going to be like in negative territory in terms of Labour policies? Like for every announced policy, we'll scrap two.
Yeah. I mean, if Sunak does, propose some kind of non-dom policy, I'm sure his wife's not going to be very happy with him. But...
No, this is the whole thing. So they're kind of stealing Labour's thunder on that.
He'll be having a divorce at the same time as an absolute disaster of an election.
I mean, it looks like we're heading for a couple of pence on income tax, a pence or a couple of pence, and they're saying national insurance again. It's just the same. I don't know why. It just feels like deja vu to me. It's like they're just doing the same strategy again and again, and really hoping that this time it works.
Yeah. Dream on.
Let's see what Jeremy Hunt was saying. I'll just wait for this little advert to play, and we'll have a little listen to Mr. Jeremy Hunt, who I think he's facing a big struggle in his seat, but I think it's safe to say he's in as Chancellor until the election. Spoken too soon, but let's hear what he says.
It's going to be a prudent and responsible budget for long-term growth. And when it comes to tax cuts, I do believe that if you look around the world, countries with lower tax tend to grow faster, North America, Asia. And so I do think in the long run, we need to move back to being a lower taxed, more lightly regulated economy. But it would be deeply unconservative to cut taxes in a way that increased borrowing, wasn't fully funded. I think, if I think of the great tax cutting budgets of the past, Nigel Lawson's budget in 1988, The reason that was so significant is because those tax cuts were permanent, and people need to know that these are tax cuts you can really afford. So it will be responsible, and everything I do will be affordable.
Any thoughts, Theo?
It reminds me of what I said a few months ago on the podcast, that when they say things like this, they sound like one of those, kids' toys where the battery's dead, but it occasionally still blurts out words. It's like, oh, tax cuts, responsibility, hard work, individualism,
Fiscal prudence. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, frantic, frenetic kind of offloading of policies. I mean, again, you can't. I don't think you can tax cut out of a bad economy. Of course not. And even if they do make a few small tax cuts, it's probably very difficult for those tax cuts to maybe make up for the inflation tax that's been levied on the public since COVID, among other things. And again, I don't think people are going to buy it. And again, I think they're going through the motions. But you never know. There could be some bombshell moments, a sudden uptick in the economy, completely independent of what the government does, and maybe it could shore up their polling to give a very, very optimistic outcome. But otherwise, I think not much there.
No, I think it is very much. It does. Going through the motions is the right way to put it. Because I just feel like they're doing all these things, and they kind of know that nothing's really going to shift the dial, but they're still doing election-y things that are designed to win the election. But they kind of know. I mean, this is what it says on Sky. This could be the last economic set piece from the Tories before the next general election. They're setting out their pitch. It's like, come on, guys. This election was decided
please don't beat us that badly, please.
This election was decided in September of 2022. Let's stop lying to ourselves.
These kinds of things, it's like an election requisite. You can't not do it. Oh, they didn't do a budget this year. Great. All right. Yeah. What's happening then?
I do think it's interesting. Rachel Reeves declined to be interviewed this weekend. Normally it's the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellor. They both go out. She's doing it next weekend. So it does speak to a little bit of insecurity from Labour, in my view, that they want to digest the budget before they're asked questions about it.
Yeah, they want to come up with some kind of nice convoluted answer as to why their policies ended up in the Conservative budget.
Yeah, that's it. And then they don't want to be asked now, tell us about your policy on nurses. And then next week they'll go, well, we've actually had to scrap that because the Tories have spent the fiscal headroom. The other thing about an autumn statement, because right now, if this was the last fiscal event, Labour could get their house in order from here. We go to September and they do a budget before the election. Labour can have all their plans laid out. Election gets called, and as Parliament shuts, they do the autumn statement and just eat up all the funds Labour had allocated. So it does feel like Labour are going to be flying by the seat of their fiscal pants heading into this election. As a mark of deliberate Conservative strategy. I mean, will it work? I don't think it will, but I don't think they're they probably are ready for what's going to hit them, but it looks pretty severe. And it also looks like the sort of the whole the fight over funds in government is going to be sort of very nerdy one for you, Theo. The 2025 spending review, department allocation. That's where it's all at. That's where Labour will have to actually commit to where is money going and where is money not going. And I suspect, tell me if you think I'm wrong, they're probably going to end up spending more on public services than they're promising to right now.
I'd say so. I think anything that would have at least medium-term tangible effect on voters to create a positive impact. Because, of course, some of the changes of the magnitude that they're proposing, would take years to implement, on top of the fact that they're going to be dealing with the fallout of this government's economic policy for many years if they do get in. So something that would immediately, or not immediately, but faster than any other policies, have a positive impact on people's lives, probably what they want to do. I mean, it's politic, but that's how they play it.
Another big thing to watch out for. You wait for it. It will be, oh, the mess is even worse than we thought. The Tories have screwed up so badly, and that'll be all they say for 5 years.
I mean, the last Cameron's Tory government, the ministers, Osborne always used to talk about how he walked into the the Treasury and the previous Chancellor had left him a note. There is no money left. I
Yeah.
just want to know what kind of notes are going to be left for this Labour government.
Yeah.
Stacks and stacks of paper.
Sorry, there's no money left. And also, the health service is like 6 months from collapsing. Good luck.
And also, all the money that is out there has lost 99% of its value.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. We priced in hyperinflation for the first month that you take office.
Oh yeah, and Yorkshire tea is now the legal tender for the currency.
Yeah, we've got a whole schematic of like siege warfare against the poor for when you take office. That people are gonna. We think there's a risk of armed revolt for bread. Yeah, it's just casual UK democracy stuff. All right, Theo, it's been good. Nice brisk podcast. Getting back into things. I'm still pretty ill, but I really enjoyed it.
You really soldiered through this one. Well done.
Thank you. I'm soldiering through just like British democracy is.
Well, we're the Giga Chads watching over British democracy.
That's us. We are, as always. Thank you for listening. From your favourite Giga Chads watching over British democracy like solemn sentinels.